So I want to spend a little time here. This is an informal presentation. We'll cover a lot of important things as well, and I will allow time for Q&A here at the end. The subtitle is Forget About the Big Talk. And I don't know when this started. It's probably been around for centuries. But there's this notion in our culture that it's the job of parents to find that time, right, that right opportunity to give their children, the parents to give their children the big talk, the birds and the bees talk, to talk about sexuality. And once I can finally get that done, whew, my job as a parent, the load on my shoulders as a parent will be much, much lighter, and I can pat myself on the back because I've done the right thing. Okay? Who thinks that's the right perspective? Good. All right. If you raise your hand, I'd give you a big right. Sorry. There is no good research to support that sort of scenario, that sort of approach for providing sexuality education. Nonetheless, it persists. This notion persists that that is the way that we should provide sexuality education. I've got 6 assumptions. I think most parents subscribe to the majority of these assumptions, with some exceptions here and there, that I'd like to take you through. And I think that if you agree with these, or if you agree with most of them, I think you'll have to buy in with my argument that the big talk is not the way to go. That there are other, more fruitful, more rewarding ways of providing sexuality education to one's children. Number 1, parents want their children to delay sexual activity until they are physically and emotionally ready. I think most parents would certainly subscribe to that. The research is very clear. Precocious sexuality, kids getting started having sex early, leads to nothing but bad things. They have, over the lifespan, there have been a couple of good longitudinal studies that show that over the lifespan, those kids who start engaging in sexual behaviors at 12, 13, 14, have far more sexual partners, are much more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors, are much more likely to acquire sexually transmitted infections, are much more likely to experience unplanned pregnancies, much more likely to have lower esteem. All kinds of things associated with precocious sexuality, getting started early. So I think most parents, even those who don't want to take the responsibility for providing sexuality education, in the home, still believe that it's best to wait. Wait until you're emotionally ready, wait until you're physically ready. Second assumption: I think that most parents want their children to protect themselves against sexually transmitted infections and unplanned pregnancies, even if they're opposed to sexuality education or formal sexuality education in one of anything but abstinence-only approach to sexuality education. I think most parents still don't want their children to come home with a sexually transmitted infection. They don't want their children, even though they may be opposed to their children using what they might consider unnatural birth control, they still don't want their children to experience unplanned pregnancy. Parents want their children to wait until they're ready. They want their children to protect themselves from STIs and unplanned pregnancies. Another one is that I think parents want their children to be happy, sexually well-adjusted adults when the time comes. I mean, all of us as parents have a difficult time, thinking of our children as sexual in the same way we have a difficult time thinking about our parents, as being sexual or one time having been sexual. But nonetheless, I think parents still would like, they swallow hard and get past that. They think, when my kids grow up, when they're mature, when they're adults, I would like them, to have a good sex life. I'd like them to be well-adjusted. I don't want it to be a difficult, part of their relationships, a part of their life. Parents want their family's values to form the basis for their children's sexual decision-making, whatever those values might be. I'm not here to talk about any particular set or collection, any constellation of values. But whatever those values are, I think parents would like, once their children are sexually active, would like them to consult, to refer to that foundation of the values that their family provided when making their decisions. Number 5, I think parents want, not all parents get this, lots of parents don't, but they sure wish they could have it. And oftentimes it's far too late, and too much damage has been done, and chances are that they're not going to have it. But parents want a close, trust-based relationship with their children. They want a relationship where children can feel, regardless of the children's age, they can come to the parents, they can ask anything, they can talk about anything. That this is an environment where you can ask me anything, you can say whatever you need to say, you're not going to be judged, you're not going to be screamed at, I'm not going to freak out, when you come to me and when you bring up issues that, we need to talk about. I think all parents want that, but lots of parents, unfortunately, don't get that. One of the points today that I'm going to try to make, one of the arguments I'm going to try to make, is that sexuality, rather than being something to stay away from and not talk about, can be a tremendous vehicle for building this, for building an environment, a trust-based environment where children can come to you, using sexuality as a vehicle for accomplishing that. And the last one. Not all parents buy into this one. I certainly believe it. A lot of parents, though, don't want to embrace this one. That parents have a moral responsibility to be the primary sexuality educators of their children. Some parents say, well, I don't have the information, I don't have the facts, I'm not the expert. And, that may be true, and I'm not asking that you become the expert, that you become, somebody who's an expert in sexuality. You don't need to be still to provide be the primary sexuality educator of your children, but you can provide an environment, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, where they can come and talk to you about sexuality, and you can, discuss things that need to be discussed. What I think parents object to when we talk about their being having the primary moral responsibility, having the moral responsibility for being the primary sexuality educator is what they want to abdicate their responsibility. They want some other institution to take care of it, right? I don't want the family to take care of it. It's really more about them than anything else. Let's just abdicate responsibility to the schools, right? Who thinks the schools should be the primary sexuality educator of their children? Now, there's something to be said for the schools doing their part. The schools certainly have a role. Or they think, okay, well, I'll just give it to the church. Let my church do it, right? We have the same values as my church. So they can let the church handle it, right? Better yet, let's let the media do it, right? Give it to the media. The media can be the institution that provides the primary sexuality education for my children. A lot of parents are just by default. I mean, that's how it ends up, because they don't consciously think about this and make the choice, it's going to be me, and it's not going to be this, so it's going to be the media. Or how about their friends? Well, let's let their peers do it, right? We'll let it happen in the locker room, in state parks, and, wherever else. Let their peers be their parties. They can be the sexuality educators of their children. And unfortunately, that's what happens in lots and lots, millions of American families, because parents don't want to take responsibility. They abdicate their responsibility. They don't believe. I'm going to try to make a case here. Yeah, do it in the home. Sexuality education in the home. Not all of it by any means. The schools certainly have their part. There are other parts, the other social structures that can certainly play their roles. But the home providing sexuality education in the home can do wonderful things for building relationships between parents and children, for making families much more cohesive, for making families much more trust-based than by sending them elsewhere. And can also build esteem in children. There's a lot of research on that. Okay, let's take a moment here and talk, before I get into the specifics, about why in the home and how to do it. How to provide it in the home. Sexuality education, or sexuality in infancy and early childhood. We don't usually think of our children as, especially at a very young age, infants, as being sexual. That whole notion about infants being sexual in any way, or children being sexual in any way, freaks parents out. And I think that's part of the reason that adults have so many hang-ups about sexuality and about their children's sexuality, regardless of the age of those children, is that we don't want to think about our kids, as being in any way sexual. But the reality is, I'm not talking about some kind of a Freudian notion where there's this libidinous energy that's moving, throughout zones of their body. But from the very beginning, we're sexual creatures, right? We may not necessarily recognize it as sexual, but we respond physiologically to stimuli that later on can certainly be defined as sexual, and we can experience later on as sexual experiences. For example, little baby boys, right, in utero, before they're born, we know that they get in utero little baby boy erections. Well, not because they're thinking, nasty little, pre-birth thoughts. It's not that, but stimulation of the penis takes place. A hand brushes up against the penis, and they get an erection, and it feels good. It starts at a very, very early age. Little boys, once they're up and about, what do? They find something very early on, right? Their penis, right? And when they're able to walk, they're grabbing onto it and running around the house, if that's permitted, and playing speed racer and riding their name in the snow and all that kind of stuff. Okay? It's a very natural, normal part of child development. Now, how parents deal with that, there's a range of ways that they can deal with that. Some parents absolutely, from the very beginning, freak out, can't handle it, from my perspective, overreact, and all of that stuff, sends very clear, unintended perhaps, but clear messages. Little girls, we certainly don't, as parents are uncomfortable with this one, but very early on, lots of little girls discover what about themselves? That touching themselves feels good, right? And they discover their clitoris, and they find that, that brushing up against, rubbing up against a pillow or a teddy bear or furniture or whatever is something that feels very good. And how parents deal with that has a lot to do with how well adjusted that child is going to be sexually, and whether that child is going to feel comfortable coming to you, talking to you about sexuality, and seeing you as, what's sometimes called an askable adult. Well, we need to get past this notion of, this objection to seeing our children, seeing infants and seeing children as sexual beings. We're sexual from the very beginning. And that's one of the hang-ups, I think, contributes to a lot of the hang-ups that parents have. Okay, so when should sexuality education begin? Presuming that the parents are going to take primary responsibility, what's the right age? When do you want to do this? Start at 5? It says about age 5. 10? 15? Okay, good. We can get a 15th, Jeff.
Depends how you define education.
Okay, depends upon how you...
If you're talking about facts and layouts and, mid-teens, they can actually think. But if you're talking about just like how you make an environment of being able to talk about it, second and fourth.
Okay, good point. Good. Okay, you saw through my forcing you to make a bad choice here. Right. It's not so much about finding the right age, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15. I think, this may sound like I'm overstating it. How is this possible? But really, parents create that environment or start building that environment from the very beginning, in how they talk about sex, how sexuality is viewed within the home, how comfortable they are dealing with sex. That's really, it's not finding the right time. Okay, now we're going to have the big talk. Right now we're going to have the birds and the bees talk. Being there from the very beginning, where you've established an environment where the child can come to you and ask you questions, and you answer them in an age-appropriate, mature, non-freaking out, kind of a way. And then they have enough information, go on, do their thing, and when they're ready and have more questions, we'll come back and ask you again, and you repeat it. And then they'll leave and then come back maybe the next day, maybe a week later, and build upon that. And in that comes the opportunity to really build a relationship, provide the sexuality education within your limits of your expertise, but also to build that relationship and build a trusting relationship with the child. What a lot of parents subscribe to, when I say the big talk, is they're subscribing to what is sometimes called the inoculation. It's supposed to be a good little graphic up there, and I don't. There we go. There we go. There he is. It's this idea. It's this nonsense notion, that one time we'll do it. We give them the one-time inoculation. The monkey's off my back as a parent. I don't have to deal with this anymore, and it's just going to take care of it. Okay, it's lots and lots of nonsense. It's parenting the easy way. Parents who parent the hard way, the right way, do it over time for years from the very beginning, and invest slowly over time. And there are lots of assumptions behind why the inoculation approach is the right way to do it. There are fallacies in it. This notion that one time will work. Well, one time isn't going to work, right? Sexuality is much more complex than that. One time doesn't work. There's this I think, implicit assumption that children are asexual up until then. When it comes time to give them, the talk, they haven't really been sexual, but they're in that optimal period now, the sensitive period. So now we need to give them the talk now. Well, they're not asexual up until then, of course not. And the presumption that sexuality is not a part of life. Sexuality is a part of life as much as everything else is a part of life. But this notion that adults have that we should compartmentalize sexuality, separate it from the rest of life, so we don't have to talk about it unless things really get bad and we really need to talk about it. Then we will, with our children. But we'll segregate it. We'll separate it from the rest of life. That's nonsense. And I think those are at least 3 fallacies that are implicit within this inoculation approach that lots and lots of parents unfortunately subscribe to. Well, poor guy. I think a big part of the problem is us, adults, not everyone in this room, but adults, and their hang-ups. The hang-ups that adults have about sexuality, not being comfortable, perhaps with their own sexuality. I'm not talking about orientation in that regard, but just comfortable with sexuality. comfortable talking appropriately and maturely about sexuality, having lots of hang-ups about sex, not that they can't have sex, but just having hang-ups about sex gets in the way of their being able to offer an environment where children can come to them and talk to them comfortably about sex. For example, how does this manifest itself? Well, in all sorts of seemingly small ways. You might say, oh, come on, this can't really have much of an impact on how a child sees his parent and thinks about his parent regarding sexuality. But how about the naming of body parts? How do we teach children to name their body parts? Okay, we'll just do it right here. Real simple, right? Okay, so we'll start. It's easy.
Eyes, ears, little wee.
What? Who knows? Yeah, everybody's got their own goofy, stupid, ding-dong, willy, pee-wee, pee-pee, tuk-tuk, whatever. Kind of just nonsense. And what's going on there? Why? What do you think? I mean, if you scratch deep enough, and talk to the parent far enough, or long enough, and get into the parent's mind, why is that? Why do the rules change? Why does everything have a legitimate clinical name when you're teaching your children body parts until you get to that? And in girls, it's down there, or special garden, or whatever. And maybe it is a special garden. That's great. But why does the nomenclature change? Why does the system change?
They're dirty words. Embarrassment, shame.
Yeah, dirty words, embarrassment, shame, trying to protect the child. We've got our child's best interest. We don't want to, there's these associations that we have with genitalia. And what that's doing, of course, by not teaching them the right body parts, teaching them vulva, teaching them vagina, teaching them clitoris, and what those terms refer to, is giving children this, it's contributing to, it doesn't shape their entire development, but it's certainly contributing to their notion about, their genitals, about sexuality, and about how you see sex, and about how you see sexuality. They haven't really fully fleshed out this notion of what sexuality is, but it's contributing. It's building their sense of who they are and their sense of sexuality. Okay, so what's the solution? Lots and lots of good research, well-done research to support this. I'm just summarizing it here just in a thumbnail. From the very beginning, not age 5, although you may want to more formally cover some things starting at age 5, where do babies come from, questions, things like that. But as much as you can from the very beginning, create and maintain a warm, trusting environment in which the child is comfortable asking about and discussing sexuality. What does that do? So from the very beginning, over time, that builds trust. So the child, as I tried to illustrate earlier, when the child has a question, can come to you, isn't going to think you're going to freak out because this is part of this whole arena that we just don't talk about in this family. And little kids figure that out very, very early on. If that's what's going on, they can come to you, they can ask a question, you're not going to overreact, you're not going to scream, "Where did you hear that?" And punish the child and shame the child and all that kind of stuff. But they can come and ask that question and talk about sexuality, and you're not going to overreact. We do that with how about table manners? When is the right time? I think this is a good illustration. At what age do we teach children table manners? Is it when they're 5? Is it when they're 7? Do we find a time? No, it's from the very, as what we give them as much as we can, as much as is appropriate, from the very beginning. So we teach them how to conduct themselves. We don't separate it from life. We don't make it compartmentalize it from the rest of their behavior, from their social functioning. But with sexuality, the rules are different. We think differently about that, so we don't want to. We teach them table manners from the beginning, sexuality as well, so that we can build. Later on, ultimately, we hope that the child is supposed to be. I guess not. Okay, I thought I had a graphic that went with this one. No. It's a little girl holding her hand up. See? Wow. Had any idea that you guys were going to be this kind of crowd. But okay, let's go through some. Got a couple minutes here for some examples. Now, many of you might say, oh no, not my daughter. No way. Not at age 5. Not my daughter. No kid of mine. No way. Totally, in this culture that we're living in, completely, totally unrealistic, okay? That, you know, to think that that's never going to happen. So, how do you handle that? You know, there's clearly a wrong way to handle it. Probably some ways that, you know, there can be good ways, functional ways of handling it. Yeah?
I guess tell her the truth, but then of course tell her, I mean, you know, that. Actually, I'm not sure exactly what I do.
I mean, this is not very long ago, the Clinton Lewinsky thing, and kids were a bit older, but some were this young, and they didn't necessarily use that term, although maybe they heard that term in association with it, and they were asking parents all over the country, you know, what's oral sex? What's oral sex? They're talking about this oral sex on the news. What's oral sex? And parents were put in a position that they didn't, lots of them didn't handle very well. Jeff?
You said something that, two people do together. It's generally done in private. And then, so you're giving an answer, not saying you're too young for an answer, but you're not describing the act, which they might then enact themselves,
Okay.
and then give a chance later on to bring it up again.
Could be. I think that might be too much too soon, going too far. Okay. I think we need to kind of do some fact finding first. Okay. Yeah.
My kids are raised by biologists, so
Okay.
I'd say it's kissing a penis.
Okay. Using the right term.
We never use euphemisms.
Good for you. Good, yeah. Other thoughts?
I don't think that, okay, at 5 years old, I don't think that, it's not that I'd be uncomfortable with necessarily talking to my child, but I wouldn't want to for the fact that they're curious. So one, if you just give any information, they're going to keep asking questions so they know exactly what it is. And then they might also, I'd be afraid of my child going and trying it with a school, with a friend.
Okay, so you said a lot here. So your first part is that I'm hearing is you're afraid that if you answer this, they're going to keep asking more questions, wanting more and more and more, and that's something you want to stay away from.
Specific act.
And you don't want to go there.
No, it's
right?
not that I wouldn't want to go there.
You're afraid it's going to open this Pandora's
5.
box, and they're going to. Okay.
At age 5, I just feel like that if they knew exactly what it was, they may be interested in trying with their schoolyard friends out of curiosity.
Okay, and that's a concern that lots of parents have. You know,
I think the reaction will be yuck.
for the kid.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
First time you heard about intercourse and how babies are really made.
Yeah.
What was the reaction?
You're going to look at that and say, oh.
That's the sickest thing. No, it can't be. Okay. Well, we'll get through this. We'll get Q&A. We'll have a couple more examples. Generally, the consensus is from people who deal with these issues on a regular basis, professionals, is, first of all, rule number 1 with all of these, don't freak out. Don't overreact. Don't start screaming. Where did you hear that? You know, all that kind of stuff, because that just contributes, you know, to this message that sex is dirty and sex is something that, you know, we don't talk about around here. And if you come to me with those kinds of issues, anything related to this arena, you know, you're not going to be welcome. So you don't want to do that. But usually it's just a matter of, the recommendation is just fact-finding. Well, that's, you know, where'd you hear that term? Just ask them that. You know, where'd you hear that? What? Maybe they'll tell you. You say, oh, your father. Okay. Where'd you hear the term? Find out first, just very casually. But you know you're interested. And then ask them, well, what do you think it is? Or what have you heard that it is? What do you know? And just go with that and let the conversation evolve. Let it, you know, develop to the point where you have a sense of where they are, the child's age, and give them enough age-appropriate information, and that's enough. You know, some parents who want to practice very sex-positive parenting take it too far. You know, and they're bringing out visual aids and all kinds of stuff. It's just too much, and that can certainly, you know, contribute negatively, you know, by overcompensating, you know, in that direction. But find out where they are and, you know, have a conversation about it, give them the appropriate information, and let them go play. You know, they may come back later for more information, but you don't have to, you know, take it all the way and explain things and get into that kind of stuff. And, you know, the correct answer is not ask your father or ask your mother. Okay? One I didn't include up here is the classic one. It's kind of cliched, but it does provide a good opportunity for talking about this. And that would be, you know, the child coming, where do babies come from? You know, clearly, You have to get a sense of where they are, how much they know, and give an age-appropriate response, but you don't freak out, and you talk about it and work them through it, as they come back to you with more and more questions. And I should have brought in, there are lots of good books, good books for children, for adolescents, dealing with these issues, but I didn't bring it in. How about this one? Lots of parents should have my doctor up here with the syringe for this one. This is not an uncommon experience for parents the world over. They walk into a bedroom or a bathroom or whatever and find that their 5-year-old boy is playing doctor, checking out body parts, comparing that sort of thing, with another kid of that age, same sex. Rule number 1, don't freak out. That's what I would say. I'm telling you what to do, but I'd say don't freak out, okay? Gather your composure. And what? Keep your composure. You never lost it, right? Next up, what'd you do?
Ask them what they're doing.
I'm sorry?
Ask them what they're doing.
You could do that. I think you probably ask them to put their clothes on, right? Ask them what they're doing. And you probably, experts disagree on this issue. Some say, immediately send the neighbor boy home. And I think how you do that is what it's all about. It's what it comes down to. If you start screaming, get out of here, don't ever show your face around here again. That's one thing. You just send the boy home and then just talk to your child about it and use it as an opportunity to talk about, how, your private parts are your private parts, right? Not lecturing, but they're your private parts, and they're not for anybody else. They're for the doctor. They're for you to wash. The doctor needs to see your private parts when you go in to see the doctor, but they're not for other people. We don't share our private parts. Something like that. Have a conversation about that. Not in a condemning kind of way at all, but just have a conversation about it. And then if the child realizes, you're not getting down on them, you're not overreacting, may see you as someone that they can come to and ask, questions about sexual. There we go. There they are. So innocuous. All right. So here we are. The Darwin Week question pertaining to all of this. Not everybody in here is a parent. Many of you are. Many of you will be parents. But our culture, of course, evolves. Will continue to evolve. The culture will advance. Will continue to evolve. It can, like any system, whatever level you want to look at this, forces of entropy or negentropy are always operative. Those of you who study physics or other types of examination of systems, what's entropy? Right. Where a system will ultimately, give in to deterioration, chaos, falling apart. Negentropy, of course, is just the opposite. And it's much easier, to put on weight than to stay fit and to stay in shape. It's much easier not to read books and to be intellectually lazy and not be curious than it is to be someone who's curious about ideas and really wants to think hard and explore opportunities intellectually. It's much easier to be a parent, who just wants to not be responsible and take moral responsibility for parenting and let somebody else do it. I think all of us, the moral obligation that we have is as we contribute to the culture, within our homes. And oftentimes it's been pointed out that as it is in the microsphere, within the home, so it is in the macrosphere, as a manifestation of the general environment. Are we going to be a part of just abdicating responsibility and letting other institutions take care of it and contribute to our own families and contribute to culture that way? Or are we going to be responsible parents and askable adults and create that kind of environment and do it the hard way, the long way, the hard way over time, where children can come to us and ask questions and use sexuality as a way of really building that relationship with children and building a trusting environment and building relationship with all kinds of great dividends that can come from it. That's the question. Now how about your questions? Q&A time? In a couple minutes. Yeah.
I think we give mixed messages to children. If we tell them that they own their body,
Right.
And then we say, well, grandma's here, go kiss her. And they don't want to. I learned this with my grandchildren. If my granddaughter doesn't want to hug me, she doesn't. The worst thing to do is go grab her,
Right.
force her.
Right.
'Cause
Yeah.
Yeah, if kids don't want to show
That's right,
affection,
that's,
don't force it.
right. No, that's a good point, yeah, I mean, let's see, further?
My big problem with this is that you kept saying you have to tell them what's age appropriate. And I think the problem is that we don't know what's age appropriate.
Yeah. There are, I wish I had brought those books. If you want to email me, I can give you some titles of some books that are available in all the bookstores that are very good at spelling out, what is, age appropriate, for most kids, within our culture. Now, you as a parent may differ, you may not see it quite that way, but they're really, laid out nicely. But that's part of it. I mean, and that's part of, being up to speed as a parent. Not that you need to be an expert, on anatomy and physiology and sexual response and all that kind of stuff. But at least to have a sense of, what is age appropriate. I think that is part of the parent's responsibility.
I did question a little bit your comparison with teaching table manners or
Yeah.
something, because I knew a long time ago that children copy the parents. So you set a good example, and that kind of doesn't work very well in sex ed, you know.
Oh, well, that's, well, you said, right, we're not modeling sexual behavior. That's
I mean,
not.
it's like table manners, if it's really too much that it bothers you, you correct them as they're doing it, and that, yeah, I just don't see a comparison there.
Okay, well, maybe I wasn't clear then. My point is that we're certainly comfortable, talking about table manners. We're comfortable talking about all of these ways, all of these behaviors that are just part of life, expectations that we have. But we're not comfortable talking about sex. Not that we need to, break it all out there in the open and overdo it. I mean, that's, let's see, all kinds of hands.
Well, that actually brought up a question for me, which is, where is the line between modeling healthy, happy sexuality, within your own partnership,
Right.
and being inappropriate and TMI for the kids? It's like, to what degree, can you be, should you be physically affectionate with one another, be flirtatious, talk about your own sexuality with your own partner, have, is there, do you have to keep all the porn and sex toys completely hidden under a lockbox? Is there, what is the degree to which you can model comfortable, happy sex? Where's the line between, you don't want to seem like you're ashamed of your own sexuality, but you don't want to be inappropriately in their face.
Absolutely. And I think that's the decision, when I mentioned way back at the beginning about, your family's values being the foundation for sexual decision making. I mean, that is what, the parents or the parent, needs to figure out, whatever is appropriate within your family. Yeah, I won't comment on some of the other stuff, but yeah, I think that's, I'm certainly not going to, give the rule that this is too much